Now, as part of the Serve Week a couple weeks ago, Jocelyn Senema and I spent a lot of time at the Redeemer Gym. And it reminded me that one of the greatest athletic events in the world is coming up, and very quickly. See, the gym was completely decked out with paper torches and Olympic rings and medals. And you can tell that Olympic fever is definitely starting to build. The torch relay, the big announcement bringing it on, is making its way closer and closer to its final destination, the site of the 2016 Olympic Games, Rio de Janeiro. Now, Brazil might seem like a long ways away, but those paper torches in the gym at Redeemer suggest that its light, its energy, is being shone even here. And it seems as though the passing of the torch in this relay building up to it can shed some light on some of the other events here in our family of faith. Because although Brazil might seem like a world away, for the past few weeks, we have all been, in a way, passing the torch. Over the past few weeks, we've had dozens of kids and teens and their families coming through our doors and the doors of Meadowlands CRC. Now, perhaps for the kids, it was a chance to get out of the house for a few hours and spend time with their friends. And maybe for the parents, it was also a chance to get the kids out of the house for a few hours. For us, though, it was the unique chance to meet the people in our community, to get to know them, build relationships with them, to talk to them about the good news of Jesus Christ, to pass on the torch of our faith. This is a torch that has been passed down for generations. And we see some of the beginnings of this torch relay in our passage today, which comes to us from the book of Deuteronomy. At this point in the story of the Bible, Moses has led the people of Israel out of slavery in Egypt, and they are continuing to live into their identity as God's chosen people. So we'll be reflecting today on chapter 6, verses 1 through 9, which can be found on page 270 of your Pew Bibles and will be up on the screen if you'd like to follow along. Beginning at verse 1. These are the commands, decrees, and laws the Lord your God directed me to teach you, to observe in the land you are crossing the Jordan to possess, so that you, your children, and their children after them may fear the Lord your God as long as you live, by keeping all his decrees and commands that I give you, and so that you may enjoy long life. Hear, O Israel, and be careful to obey, so that it may go well with you, and that you may increase greatly in a land flowing with milk and honey, just as the Lord, the God of your ancestors, promised you. Hear, O Israel, the Lord our God, the Lord is one. Love the Lord your God with all your heart, and with all your soul, and with all your strength. These commandments that I give you today are to be upon your hearts. Impress them on your children. Talk about them when you sit at home and when you walk along the road, when you lie down and when you get up. Tie them as symbols on your hands and bind them on your foreheads. Write them on the doorframes of your houses and on your gates. This is the word of the Lord. Now, over these past few weeks, and in many more weeks and months to come, we've had the opportunity to be passing the torch, passing the light of Jesus Christ to those who may not have ever encountered it before, so that these children and the children after them may come to know the Lord our God. Impressing these laws and commands and decrees, this good news, to our children. Now, like the Olympic torch relay, our passing of the torch is, in fact, a relay. It's not up to just one person. It takes all of us throughout the whole history of the church, all of God's people in Israel, and all of God's people here today. And so it has taken every single one of God's volunteers and prayer partners, everyone involved. Verse 4 and 5 of our passage today say this: Hear, O Israel, the Lord our God, the Lord is one. Love the Lord your God with all your heart and with all your soul and with all your strength. Now, these two verses have become known as the Shema, and throughout history, they have been recited twice daily by devout Jewish people. It is their way to talk about the commandments given to them at home or on the road. It's their way to tie them as symbols on their hands and foreheads and the doorframes of their houses. It's their way to remember the love of God and to impress that on their children. Throughout history, the church has done what it can do for that message to be spread, to ensure that it lasts. And so often that involves children. It's why we do Christmas pageants and why we do memory verses, why we do Kids Connect or Serve or VBS. It's not just something that we do. It's our way of passing that torch on to our children, passing on what is important to us, to them as well. And the long life that we enjoy by passing it on isn't just for us as individuals. This job is not just for us as individuals, but as a tribe, as a people of God. We are meant to do it together. It's not an individual race, but a relay, begun generations ago and continuing on today and into the future. And we all have our section of the relay to run. Now, I'd like to do something a little bit different right now, and I hope you'll all be all right with that. I'm going to be asking you in a moment to stand up if one of these statements apply to you. And if you are unable to or uncomfortable with standing, feel free to simply raise your hand. So please stand or raise your hand if you were one of the volunteers for VBS last week. And I know who you are, so I can wait for all of you to do it. Please stand and raise your hand if you were one of the volunteers for Serve that week. If you donated food or craft supplies or anything else to VBS or Serve. If you told a friend or a neighbor about VBS or Serve. If you prayed for VBS or Serve. If even for a moment you thought, oh, this VBS and Serve, they sound pretty cool, please stand or raise your hand. If you're visiting today and you're thinking, this VBS and Serve program sounds top-notch, you may also stand or raise your hand. We don't want anyone left out. I'm pretty sure if there's anyone who is not standing or raising their hand right now, you have underestimated your involvement. So I would like everyone to please stand or raise your hand. There's an old saying that it takes a village to raise a child. So please look around for a moment. This is our village. This is the Israel, the people of God that he is speaking to. Because for the past few weeks, this is part of the village that have joined in the efforts of raising children to be followers of Christ. You may be seated. In our passage today, God is teaching the Hebrew people, the people of Israel, as we are to teach our children. And just like the adults back then, adults and teens and young adults today may feel as though we still have a lot to learn if we are to teach our children, and if we are to help continue teaching each other. We still need the same wisdom and reminder from God if we are to raise them as followers of Christ. Now, the more I am up here, the more you will get to know me, for better or worse. And so I should let you know that I am a pretty big country music fan. It's the byproduct of growing up in a small town, so I'm sorry. You can groan if you need to, and I'll accept judgment. But the great thing about country music, I have found, is that much of it is still faith-based, and it can offer a lot of sermon inspiration. See, last week I was driving home from Serve quite late at night, alone in the dark in the quiet streets of Ancaster, and I heard a line in a song that said, "I've got a son and he's got questions about heaven and all that stuff. What kind of dad ain't got no answers?" I think we have the line up on a slide on the screen. There we go. Thank you. Now, I don't blame you if you're thinking, Adam, that's a bit of a stretch for a sermon. But if we look further on in Deuteronomy chapter 6, we find verse 20 saying, in the future, when your son asks you, what is the meaning of the stipulations, decrees, and laws the Lord our God has commanded you? In other words, heaven and all that stuff. What kind of dad, what kind of mom, what kind of grown-up ain't got no answers? I would say the normal kind. It's okay if we don't have all the answers right away for our children as we pass on the torch. The Hebrew people, God's chosen people, certainly didn't. It's okay if we still have more to learn together. And that country song goes on to say, if I'm wrong somewhere along the way, I hope he sees that God must have a big old heart to love a man like me. It is the truth of God's big old heart that we are being asked to pass down to our children. The knowledge and assurance that he loves them and will take care of them. So we don't just pass on the torch as a matter of tradition or principle, but because we have seen and experienced the power and beauty of God's love. And it's something that we can't help but share. And the imperfect men and women that we aren't being asked to share that alone. Moses taught the people so that they could teach their children together, in community. And that is how we are still meant to do it today. As a village, as a community. It's why we in the Christian Reformed tradition baptize our children publicly, so that everyone can see it, so that everyone can take part in raising our children from the very moment they enter the community. It's why we have grown-up volunteers for Kids Connect and GEMS and Cadets and Fish and Friendship and Serve and VBS. It takes a village, and so all of God's villagers take part. Many here today may have had some sort of village in their lives. People who passed the torch on to us, who passed on to us what we are now meant to pass on to our kids. People who brought us into the relay, who extended God's invitation to join in his mission. And these people are not just parents in the traditional sense, even if that is the term that's so often used. When we hear Moses say, your children, we could easily assume that he is addressing just the biological parents of those children. But in Christ, we are all parents. We are all charged with passing on the faith to the children of our community. We all have the privilege of passing on the faith to the children of our community. In our passage specifically today, Moses addresses that community as a whole. When he says, your children, he meant that entire generation of kids. At VBS last week, we as a church parented a generation of kids every morning. We parented a group of kids who may have never heard the good news of Jesus Christ before, who may have never experienced the joy of God's big old heart. At Serve, we as Ancaster and Meadowlands CRC parented a generation of teenagers who were seeing their faith in action, maybe for the first time. And the metaphor works because some of us were even responsible for trying to get those teenagers to bed on time. And that was no easy task, so all the parents have my sympathy and respect. And at the end of the week, we sent them back off into the big, wide world, where they will continue to be parented by teachers and coaches and family members, by the other people taking part in this relay. We trust that God will put those people in their lives to do just that. Just as we were entrusted with these kids for a week, so now we trust others with our own children. We trust that the Spirit will continue to work in them and their families, will continue to stir in their hearts, drawing them closer and closer to Christ. Now, when rapper will.i.am carried the Olympic torch for the Summer Games back in London in 2012, he was criticized for carrying his phone with him. People thought that he should have been completely present for such a pivotal moment and not distracted by the internet and sending updates to Facebook or Twitter. This is the Olympic torch relay, and he was busy updating things on his phone. But he described it this way. He has 13.3 million followers on Twitter. That's 13.3 million people that he was able to share the experience of his part of the relay with. In his own way, he was tying that experience as a symbol on his hands and binding it on his forehead. He took his part in the relay and he made sure that it was visible for all to see. It is important that when we pass on the torch, it is a visible and shared experience. In many instances, it may be the only way that people can see faith in action. We had 4 short mornings with the kids last week. That's not a lot of time. And so we needed to make sure that that time, though small in quantity, was big on quality. Not because that we show off our faith, but because following the decrees and commands that the Lord gives us is meant to be such a part of our identity that others can't help but notice it in us. Because the commands that we're given aren't just a path or a routine to follow, but a light to hold up high, to shine on what God is doing in our world. It wouldn't be very exciting if the Olympics were kept secret, so that no one except for the participants and their families could be a part of it. The excitement comes from it being a community event, seeing those decorations at Redeemer and hearing people talk about it at the grocery store or when they're out to do errands. The excitement becomes palpable. So it is to be with our faith. Now, I will admit, I'm actually not a huge fan of the Summer Olympics. Usually I just watch to be a part of the conversation. I'm much more of a Winter Games fan. But I think that hopefully even that failing points to what God is saying to us in our passage. Because it's not much use in talking about the torch relay and the Olympics, getting all excited for it, if you're not going to participate in some way. In that same way, there's not much use of us talking and getting excited about Jesus Christ, about the light from his torch, if we don't do anything with it. Many children's ministry experts have lamented how easy it is for programs like VBS to spend time trying to convince kids to behave Christianly without actually teaching them Christianity, without giving them any visible sign of what faith is truly about, any visible sign of what it's like to live with Jesus Christ. It would be like buying your son his first tie without actually teaching him how to tie it. Are we helping our kids to simply get by, to simply survive, behave in the right way? Or do we really desire for them to thrive in Jesus Christ? Are they experiencing the transforming power of his love in their lives? Are they witnessing that same transforming power when they look at our lives? The Faith Formation Committee here at church is using a tool called the Building Blocks of Faith to help determine if the needs of each demographic is being met. And one of those needs is I have hope. When we seek to pass on the torch, the light, pass on our faith to our children, it's so that they might have hope. It's so that they might be sure of what they hope for and certain of even what they cannot see. It's so that they might have a glimpse of that land of milk and honey, even when this world seems to be a sad and scary place. Well-known American chaplain Peter Marshall once said that if you have no prayer life yourself, it is a rather useless gesture to make your child say their prayers every night. Now, this might come across as more disciplinary and harsh in tone than actually meant, but it helps to stress the importance of not just telling our kids about a spiritual life, but showing them, making it visible, actively engaging in it ourselves and with them. Because as I'm sure you know, children learn by watching. I've used this idea in sermons many times before, and I likely will again. But how often have we seen a little kid mimic the adults in their lives? Walk, talk, dress, and act like those adults. If they learned to tie a tie like their parents, what if they learned to pray like their parents? What if we all did our best to make our faith visible to them, to share it with them, to hold our torch high so that when they pick up their own torch, they know how to carry it, to share with them the hope that we have, the hope that they can have. I heard a story this week about a little kid who drew a picture of her mom for Mother's Day. Mom always said that she was a blonde, and she usually looked it. But the little girl drew almost half of her hair black, from the top of the roots extending down. No matter what we try and tell our children, they will see what we are actually showing them. These past couple of weeks, and in all the months and years to come, it is important that we show our kids the torch of our faith, that we model for them a faith in God that we would want them to have as well, that we would talk about it everywhere, that the love of God would be visible in what we do with our hands and think with our heads, believe with our hearts, that everyone who enters our homes would know that the Spirit dwells there, that it would be impressed on our children, that our children would look at us, see our faith, and how we follow Jesus, that they would look at us and see us looking to Christ. Now, according to what I found on the internet, which of course is almost never wrong, this year's Olympic torch relay is taking place over several months and in over 300 cities stretched from Greece over to Brazil, and it involves 12,000 torchbearers. It is a long, long road that doesn't begin or end with each individual person. A few years ago, when I was a coach for a soccer camp, there was one little boy on my team who could definitely be classified as a bit of a troublemaker. To protect his privacy, I'll call him Calvin. It's a good name. See, Calvin didn't really like to follow directions. He wasn't much of a team player. He didn't like to lose. He had a hard time respecting grown-ups, and he often accused others of bullying when, if you looked at what had happened, he was probably more of the bully himself. He also had a number of issues going on at home, with a sister who was causing just as much trouble that week, and their father was in and out of hospital dying of cancer. Now, one day he was causing just a bit too much trouble in our small group time, when we would sit and talk about Jesus and a particular passage of Scripture. I did have to remove him from the group and explain to him why his behavior was inappropriate. And he confided in me that one of the reasons that he was feeling bad was because he'd never been to church before, ever. He'd never heard about God and this Jesus guy. So we talked for a while about who God was, about his son, Jesus Christ. But Calvin was a pretty big fan of the Percy Jackson book series, which some of the parents and kids here might know. Calvin really liked Greek mythology, and somehow by the end of our conversation, he'd worked out that Jesus Christ must be the big brother of Hercules, and he must now live on Mount Olympus. And he was perfectly content with that. He ran off happily, and we didn't have problems for the rest of the day. Now, when my seminary professors heard this, they were a little bit horrified. And I'll admit that I wish that I could have given him a better picture of who Christ truly is. But I had to remember that it's not just my job. And it is not just the job of any parents who have sent their kids to Sunday school or to youth group, who have prayed for their children and done everything they can to pass on the faith, but still don't see the fruit that they have prayed for. Passing on the torch in this little boy's life, in all of our children's lives, is not just a one-stop conversation, but a long, long road that may last their entire lives. A road that doesn't begin or end with me, with mom or dad, or any of the other torchbearers in their lives. So I might never get to see the effects of the torch relay in Calvin's life. I might never see the built-up muscles or the sweat on his brow. I might never see those commands written on his heart and bound on his forehead. I might have only gotten to see that first puzzled look on his face. And that has to be okay. Our time with each other was short. And this year, VBS was just 4 days. Serve just a week, and it flew by. Our time to pass the torch is fleeting. But the actual journey is much bigger than us. It is lifelong. From generation to generation, until we all reach that land flowing with milk and honey. And these children, though we call them our children and we take care of them, they're not actually just in our hands. These children belong to the Lord. They are in His hands. And He is not going to let them go, no matter what we can or can't accomplish in their lives. His love for them, His faithfulness to them, is everlasting. Now again, online a while back, a friend of mine posted this picture, which shows a farmer and his child, and it says, "The land is my lifestyle and my livelihood, but it's also my legacy." What will our legacy be? What torch will we pass on? Not just to our children, but to all the children in our lives. We are to impress the love of Jesus Christ onto the children in our lives. Talk about that love at home and on the road, when we settle down for the day and when we get up in the morning. We are to tie it as a symbol on our hands and on our foreheads, writing it on our homes and on our gates. We are asked, we are commanded, we have the honor of passing the torch of God's everlasting and unconditional love. We do it because we love these children, and we love them because He first loved us. Will you please pray with me? Father, as we reflect back on a week of Serve and VBS, and we look ahead to the opportunities ahead, may our hearts, may our hands, and may our lips all sing your praises. We ask that you would equip us to share the hope that comes from a life with you. And God, may our lives be a testament to your glories and your mighty deeds. In your name we pray. Amen.